Carol Burnett entertained audiences for 11 years in a row. The 1977 incident, nevertheless, was the one that broke the hearts of her whole staff. There was just one airing of the show, and it devastated spectators. Many praised it as a masterpiece. Trophies were showered upon them. Unfortunately, Carol never turned it back on. Never in 47 years. It was too real, she remarked. She couldn't stand to see herself in the sketch since it was too true to life. What caused the funniest lady in America to avoid accepting her own comedy? April 26 is the birthday of Carol Burnett. The year in San Antonio, Texas, she had nothing but misery in her life from the start. Because they were both drunk, her parents were unable to provide for her. Even though he was never good at keeping a job, her dad worked at a movie theater. Even though she was emotionally distant, her mother drank excessively. A subsequent sickness tied to drinking would claim their lives. Carol knew what it was like to be unloved even when she was a little girl. Bottles were preferred over goodnight tales by the ones who were supposed to love her the most. The world was harsh and unpredictable, and Carol quickly discovered that laughing helped her weather the storm. Mabel White, Carol's maternal grandmother, took her in when her parents gave up on raising her. Moving to Hollywood in 1940, they departed from Texas. Although a red carpet was not in the works, in a dilapidated boarding home, they shared a small room with several troubled individuals. People living on welfare who are addicted, have mental illness, or are fighting for survival. With about $20 each week, Carol and her grandmother could hardly afford food, much alone a dream. What Carol had never experienced before, though, was Mabel's unconditional affection. She had no money, but at least she was no longer in danger. Developed a means of evasion amidst all that mayhem. Karen, her made-up twin sister, was her creation. Carol wasn't anything like Karen, glamorous, self-assured, and perpetually beaming. Even the other tenants thought she existed because of how genuine Carol created her. After a quick dash up the fire escape, she'd transform into Karen by switching her hairstyle, clothing, and makeup. Entertaining and carefree. Shortly after that, she would reappear as Carol. The fact that these grown-ups, some of whom were clinging on by a thread, bought into it. That says a lot about Carol's acting chops and about how much the whole family needs a positive belief system. However, not all escapes were equally genuine. Going to the movies was a weekly tradition for Carol and her grandma. A couple of tickets would set them back 25 cents, which is almost 10% of their weekly revenue. Carol temporarily escaped the shrieking, paint-peeling, and terrifying situation for those few hours. Life shimmered on screen. People kissed as stars danced. There was beauty, order, and food. The emphasis, however, shifted back to survival as the credits rolled. Since they were short on toilet paper at home, they would sneakily pilfer it from the theater's restrooms. They didn't feel embarrassed. They needed help badly. Carol knew what it was like to have hunger for something other than food even when she was 7 years old. As she sat in the dimly lit theater one day, she could make out the echoes of Johnny Weissmuller's iconic Tarzan cry. She was struck by lightning. She went to her house and started imitating it religiously, honing her rhythm and pitch to perfection. She had no clue that she was honing her singing voice and developing the type of control over her breath that takes most singers years to achieve. Despite being only a game, it became instantly recognizable. Later on, during her live performances, the shout would have the crowds in fits of laughter and ovation, an early item in her comedic armory. What started as a child's mimicry eventually became her trademark. Carol had just one goal in mind when she graduated from high school: journalism. Carol felt compelled to complete her mother's unfinished writing project since her mother had always aspired to be a writer. The target was UCLA. However, a harsh truth confronted her when the time arrived to join. The $50 required to pay for school was out of her possession. Today, that amounts to about $600. In the minds of the majority, it would have been fatal. That seems to be the case for some time. After then, an unusual occurrence occurred. The money was provided for by an anonymous stranger whose name she was never told. Nothing to lose, nothing to explain. Sufficient funds to transform her life. She had originally intended to major in journalism while at UCLA, but her plans were completely disrupted after taking an elective in theater. There was a snap in her soul when she was in that room. Her timidity had vanished. neither poverty nor oblivion befell her. She sounded lively, entertaining, and full of life. Even her teachers took note, as did the rest of her class. At the same time that she could sing and act, she could also make people laugh. Journalism became insignificant to her all of a sudden. Her academic focus shifted. It was precarious. However, this was the first time she had ever not been able to survive. Enchanted by her dreams, quickly, that gamble paid off. Her first year at UCLA, she was recognized as the theater program's most promising newbie. It went beyond just being a title. A prophecy it apparently was. It reassured her that following her heart wasn't completely insane. She gained the confidence to step up her game, give her all on stage, and quit apologizing for wanting more from life than simply surviving. That, because of the honor, she was able to get more prestigious parts in school plays and the encouragement of teachers and administrators who saw that she was unique. Not just any aspiring actor, she was. There was an undeniable charisma about her. As a college junior in 1954, Carol Burnett worked as an usher for 65 cents an hour. She skipped the San Diego party where her life took an unexpected turn. Gathering hors d'oeuvres to take home with her for her grandma, she stuffed them inside her purse. At that moment, an unidentified man in a smart suit approached her. The entertainment industry wasn't his target. A shipbuilder from La Jolla, he was worth $1 million. The $43 tuition at UCLA was too much for Carol, who told him she wanted to be a Broadway star but couldn't afford to travel to New York. She thought the man's offer was too good to be true. Don Soroy and her boyfriend and she each received $1,000. 3 rules, nonetheless, were his to impart. His identity should be hidden at all times. Proceed alone to New York with the funds. Additionally, achieving success included assisting others in reaching their goals. Acclaim was not anything he desired. Just like that, he was saying he was paying it forward since someone had helped him before. In retrospect, his wife would claim that he had dealt with similar situations for restaurants, petrol businesses, and dreamers in the past. Once Don had the $2,000 in hand, he packed up and departed from UCLA. Despite Carol's lack of travel experience outside Texas, they set off for the East in 1954. Despite her lack of acquaintances in the Big Apple, she was unconcerned. "I wasn't terrified since I didn't know enough," she added afterwards. When they reached the city, they booked a $9 night at the Algonquin Hotel. It was just too busy. Quickly, the funds vanished. While on a collect conversation with her family, she sobbed and pleaded with them to let her return. She was on the verge of giving up when a radio announcement cut through the background. Carol, the storm, was making its way up the coast. It seemed to her like a sign. It must have given her the will to remain somehow. The rehearsal club was like a whole other universe to her. It had been a boarding home for artistically minded young women in the past. Carol was one of 5 actors who shared a room and slept on cots for $18 per week. There was a single closet and a single restroom. But she thought it was heaven on earth. When she was at home, she slept on a couch. A flurry of activity filled the air. Teenage girls rehearsing their routines, making music, and frantically adjusting their hair curlers. Carol auditioned throughout the day and worked as a hat-check lady at night to make ends meet. It was authentic, but unglamorous. The rehearsal club review was a performance she and the other girls put on in March 1955, and they sent invites to producers and agencies. Guests included Marlene Dietrich, a famous actress. Beginning that evening, doors began to open. Something completely out of the ordinary gave her her first major break. This is a love ballad dedicated to the stern and grave U.S. Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, State Department official. It was a ridiculous, over-the-top humor tune composed by Ken Welchen. The flawless way Carol delivered it, though, made it her trademark performance. People in the audience lost it. The Jack Paar Show and The Ed Sullivan Show both invited her to appear on their shows. It was January 6, 1957, and she shakily made her way to the Sullivan stage. But by the time her act was over, the audience was in fits of laughing. In August of that year, she returned to play the most uninteresting song once more, along with a puppy love spoof. She became the buzz of New York City comedy with that absurd ballad. After that, Carol continued grinding for another 5 years. She portrayed the girlfriend of a ventriloquist in a brief 1955 appearance on The Paul Winchell Show. As a result, she landed a one-year role opposite Buddy Hackett in Stanley. However, it all changed in 1959. An off-Broadway musical called Once Upon a Mattress, which Carol secured the lead role in, was taken up for a Broadway run. She portrayed Princess Winifred, a marsh girl who was unlike any princess you'd meet in a fairy tale, loud and awkward. The show's popularity skyrocketed. Her initial Tony nomination came from her. Carol and Don repaid the entire $2,000 on June 22, 1959, which was precisely 5 years after she received that enigmatic loan. No one ever heard back from the wealthy. Until the very end, he maintained his anonymity. Carol felt like she had won the lottery when her weekly earnings reached $500 at that point. Even the producers didn't anticipate Once Upon a Mattress doing well. It all began with a little summer camp project. Upon its 1959 May Broadway premiere, critics were not fond of it. Audiences, however, did. The musical traveled from theater to theater for 470 performances. It was Carol's performance that sealed the deal. Shortly after her departure in June 1960, the program ended its run. The show that she replaced abruptly ended after just 8 performances. By now, Carol was indispensable. Gary Moore's show followed. Carol evolved from a promising young star to a dominating force in television during the years 1959 and 1962. In 1962, she received her very first Emmy. Though her portrayal of the maid became famous, the show's true influence lay in the lessons it taught her. The real audience participation that came to characterize the Carol Burnett program was influenced by Gary Moore's impromptu question-and-answer sessions. Stars like Don Knotts and Jonathan Winters got their starts on the show as well. Between its 1950–1967 run, it solidified its place as a classic variety program. It was a risk-taking, character-building, and timing masterclass. Carnegie Hall was the site of yet another miraculous event in 1962. She was reluctant to make a special with Julie Andrews because CBS was skeptical. They said that Carol appeared on TV weekly and that Julie lacked the necessary fame. However, Michael Dann and Oscar Katz, the two executives in charge, witnessed Carol attempting to hail a cab one night following a promotional event. The idea that a truck driver would likely offer her a lift home was her joke, she said. A truck did, in fact, come up a few moments later and offered to give her a ride. Executives accepted it as destiny. They greenlit the show. A Rose d'Or, an Emmy, and a special about Julie and Carol at Carnegie Hall were the 3 main prizes that went to that show. Columbia Records even put out a soundtrack, which peaked at #85 on the charts, but that was little in comparison to what transpired thereafter. Everything changed the day the Carol Burnett Show debuted on September 11, 1967. No one dared to believe a woman could do what Carol did. ChatGPT quoted Variety as saying it was rated 23. That is the size of it. Large figures weren't the only thing at stake, though. The program revolutionized television. Live comedic sketches performed for an in-studio audience were a hallmark of this pioneering variety program. The format later served as an inspiration for Saturday Night Live. Additionally, Carol Burnett made significant strides. She was more than a mere celebrity. She pioneered the role of female variety show host. During an era when males predominated in television, she broke barriers and made room for many female comedians. The show's popularity was consistent throughout all airing times. Regardless of whether it aired at 10 p.m. on Mondays or later on Saturdays, viewers continued to tune in. Consistency like that is unusual. Not only that, but others took note as well. The Carol Burnett Show received an unprecedented 25 primetime Emmys over its 11-year run. 25 is correct. Not all of the accolades were for the same thing. Best Variety Series, Original Music, Choreography, and Writing were all given to the show. In his own right, Harvey Korman won 4 Emmys. Over the years 1969, 1974, 1971, 1972, and 1972, and 1974 for exceptional supporting roles. Aside from those 2, Tim Conway took home 3 for acting and a 4th for writing. Even in its last year, 1978, the show was a smashing success, winning several awards, including Best Variety Series. It went on from there. Carol Burnett was the recipient of 2 Golden Globes in 1977 and 1978 for her performance in a comedy or musical. The show also took home the prize for Favorite Variety Program from the People's Choice Award for 3 years running. 1979, 1980, and 1981. Its status as television royalty was cemented by its sweep of several trophies. Since then, the majority of variety programs have failed miserably. However, not all was joy and celebration behind the scenes. Harvey Korman almost left the program permanently in Season 7. Petula Clark, a singer, and Tim Conway, one of the nicest men in show business, were guests that week. However, it was not Korman's mood. He acted aggressively and irritably during the rehearsals. Though she typically lets things slip, Carol Burnett isn't letting this one slide. After Friday night's taping, she took him aside and wanted to know what was wrong. Korman responded with severe severity. According to him, he is simply unhappy here. Then he confronted her by forcefully slamming the door to the dressing room. There it was. Burnett dismissed him over the phone with his agency. However, Korman reconsidered his stance throughout the weekend. He pleaded for a second opportunity. Burnett was in agreement, but he had a condition. She wished for him to witness her skipping and whistling down the CBS corridor on Monday morning. He went ahead and did it. On Monday morning, he hopped from the lift while humming and skipping. After having a plaque created for his door, Burnett couldn't help but bust out laughing. Mr. Joyful Liar. Through Season 10, Korman remained a part of the program. Coming next was Tim Conway. The unknown variable was Conway. It was his reign. Never give it your all during warm-ups. Even though it confused everyone else, he reserved his finest lines for the live tapings. He mentioned once that certain ideas just pop into his head, and some of them is something I work on later. Because of such approach, each performance was unique and unexpected. It was best put by Harvey Korman. His methods are always unique. The elephant narrative is where Conway's anarchy was most famously displayed. A family series sketch included him telling a drawn-out absurd story about an elephant at a circus. While he went on at length, Vicki Lawrence, Carol Burnett, and Dick Van Dyke did their best to maintain character. However, the plot continued to grow more bizarre and entertaining. Even Vicki Lawrence seemed to lose it towards the end. She retaliated with a quip that everyone on set found hilarious to be Is that tiny $1 hole really through? A fit of uncontrollable laughing even erupted from Conway. The show's heart and soul were moments like those, direct, honest, and entirely unrehearsed. Still, certain scenes lacked humor. Something that occurred in 1977 had a profound impact on Carol Burnett. It was lifted from The Family, a reoccurring sketch. She brought her tragic story of a lady whose hopes and ambitions were dashed to the screen as Eunice Higgins. This was a departure from the usual dysfunctional comedy routine. No hyperbole, no humor, just misery. The name of the sketch was The Gong Show. It follows Eunice as she fantasizes about being famous after performing her heart out on a talent event. Contrarily, she is mocked by the judges. Alan Ludden, a real-life game show presenter, played one of them. Burnett was deadpan in her performance. Not a single member of the crew was able to control their laughter or expressions till the very finish. The episode maintained its impact when it was shown. As the lights went down, the camera gradually retracted to reveal Eunice's face, which was smeared with tears. No sound, no mirth. Nothing except sadness. The audience was taken aback. Although critics gave it good reviews, Burnett chose not to see it again. "Was too real," she remarked in an interview from 2010. "Eunice's suffering was palpable to me. Reason being, it was genuine. As a child, Burnett lived in poverty. Feeling mocked for her lofty ambitions was something she was familiar with. It was too personal for that sketch." Afterwards, she spoke about her emotions in a Harper's Bazaar interview. She continued by saying that while she was pleased that they accomplished it, our program wasn't about it. Instead than reminding individuals of their problems, our purpose was to help them forget about them. Nonetheless, the drawing was memorable. It spawned a spin-off comedy named Ye Mama's Family and a 1982 TV movie named Eunice, Ama Junice. After becoming dissatisfied with the show's trajectory, Burnett left the series. However, the original episode was known for a long time. Carol Burnett's comedic talents were multifaceted. Her private life was a whirlwind of turmoil. family strife and tragedy that would have crushed most people. Meeting her first spouse, Don Soroyan, in college was the beginning of everything. Both of them aspired to stardom when they were young and infatuated. He aspired to great things after being born in Omaha in 1928. Despite meeting in 1952 at UCLA and being married 3 years later in 1955, their love tale didn't last. After the death of his daughter from a prior relationship, Don changed forever. His career ground to a halt, but Carol's rocketed off. Their marriage was weakened by the strain. Their 1959 Christmas Day separation led to their 1962 divorce. Don, who was just 62 years old when he passed away in 1990, struggled with alcoholism and despair. His aspirations of performing on stage were never realized. Lost my virginity in a flash. Thereafter, she crossed paths with Joe Hamilton. Joe has 8 children from a previous marriage and was a prominent television producer. In 1962, he had also organized Carol's performance at Carnegie Hall. After working together on her successful show, they tied the knot in 1963. Erin, Jody, and Carrie were their 3 daughters, along with a 1965 miscarriage. It seemed like their house was never empty, what with Joe's 8 and everything. While he was Carol's show producer, he won 5 Emmys. Their personal lives began to crumble as their professions took off. The National Enquirer published an article in 1976 that falsely claimed Carol was intoxicated when seated next to Henry Kissinger at a restaurant. Not only was it untrue, but she had spent years fighting alcoholism, so it impacted her hard. Her lawsuit against the tabloid was worth $1.06 million. The lawsuit exposed the irresponsibility of tabloids and dragged on for 5 years. The account was published despite a hired source having informed the Enquirer that Carol wasn't inebriated. She was victorious in court, but the matter was ultimately settled for around $200,000. The money wasn't the main concern. The case, which aimed to clear her name, had a lasting impact on tabloid journalism, but the courtroom wasn't where she fought her greatest personal fight. It happened in the comfort of one's own home. Her daughter Carrie's drug addiction began in earnest in the 70s. Carrie began taking cocaine, weed, mushrooms, and quaaludes when she was 13 years old. She came clean about her drug usage, saying it helped her escape her role as Carol Burnett's daughter. Carol saw the disappearance of her kid from 1976 until 1979. She sent her back to treatment following treatment, got escaped from a facility in Texas once, for the possibility of always losing her daughter. There was a price to pay when Carrie became sober at the age of 17. The most difficult choice of her life lay ahead of Carol. It made Carrie despise her. "You must love them to the point where they detest you," Carol remarked once. She persisted even though they were silent for more than a year. They grew more closer once Carrie returned. Carrie proved she had her own skill when she got a huge part on the TV show Fame. She collaborated with Carol on screen and in the theater for a number of episodes and films before penning a play on Carol's life titled Hollywood Arms. Tragic events continued to befall them despite their inseparable bond. Passed away in 2002 as a result of pneumonia brought on by lung cancer that had progressed to her brain. At 38 years old, she was still quite young. Hollywood Arms never got the chance to perform live. Carol was devastated, but she told herself, "I owed it to Carrie," and she continued. It was 1984 when Carol's second marriage ended. By that point, Carrie's sickness had taken hold. She and Joe Hamilton were both emotionally and professionally drained from the burden of their jobs. So that their 2 younger children wouldn't have to see their parents break down, they had moved them to live in Hawaii. Until his death from cancer in 1991, Joe remained close to his family. After the divorce, Carol found love again after having gone through 2 marriages and 2 devastating heartbreaks. She met Brian Miller in the late 90s while playing in Long Beach. Despite being 23 years younger, it was irrelevant. In 2001, they tied the knot. His age was 45 and hers was 68. Carrie passed away only 2 months after that. During Carol's lowest point, Brian was there to help. After he pushed her to finish Hollywood Arms, they remained a couple. Carol and Brian played the role of foster parents in 20s on 20 when their youngest daughter, Erin, was struggling with addiction and unable to care for her own kid. Dylan, their grandson, was taken into their custody. A 19-year nightmare had become Erin's addiction. She had spent roughly 240 days in an institution after 8 stays in rehabilitation. When it became clear that Erin's house was no longer secure for her kid, the court stepped in. A suicidal ideation reached Erin's children in July 2020. She was put on a mental hold after the police intervened. Soon thereafter, petitioned to become Dylan's legal guardian. The court quickly granted Carol and Brian interim custody within a few weeks. It hurt her heart, but she had to step in again to defend her family. When Carol Burnett made an appearance in Better Call Saul's final season, it shocked everyone. Despite being 89 years old, her acting was as crisp as ever. Marion, an elderly woman who reveals Saul Goodman's true nature in a methodical and compassionate manner, was played by her. She used Ask Jeeves to uncover Saul's falsehoods while she sat silently in her kitchen in the episode Waterworks. Her discovery altered the course of events. I had faith in you. It was a memorable moment. Fear gripped Saul. She finally broke him with a single line after all the tension had built up. He contemplated permanently stifling her voice. Vince Gilligan, who co-created the show with Carol Burnett, subsequently said that it was terrible to write the scene in which Saul considered murdering her. She is a national treasure, he declared. However, its potency was due to just that, and it was terrible. Audiences were on the edge of their seats due to her subtle power and nervous voice. After a composed moment, she deactivated Saul's life alert and handed him over. Among the most terrifying and great moments in the history of the program, according to critics. It wasn't the only occasion when Burnett's versatility shocked audiences. She was a guest star on Mad About You in the 90s. The show's popularity skyrocketed when Burnett appeared as Teresa, enhancing the already stellar cast of Paul Reiser and Helen Hunt. Outstanding guest actress in a comedy series was the Emmy she earned in 1997. She demonstrated she was more than simply a sketch comic with her triumph. Just as effortlessly, she could manage contemporary comedy. Unlike her days of over-the-top physical comedy on variety shows, her scenes here felt authentic and effortless. It was subtler, more perceptive, and profoundly humorous. Her guest appearances earned her the American Comedy Award for 2 years running. That was deliberate. It was a talent honed over many years of performing for live crowds. In addition to those 2 accolades, she received a whopping 25 Emmy nominations over her career. Where Burnett's physical humor trailed off in the 2000s, her voice took over. After that, she dove headfirst into animated films, providing her voice to a wide variety of vibrant characters. In 2008, she had her breakout role in the computer-generated remake of The Doctor. Seuss Book Horton, Here's a Who. She was in an ensemble with Steve Carell and Jim Carrey, and the picture became an international smash, earning $298 million from an expenditure of only $85 million. She co-starred with Reese Witherspoon, Jason Alexander, and Mary Steenburgen as Mrs. Hammerbotham in the 2001 film The Trumpet of the Swan. Through these parts, she was able to reach children who had never watched the Carol Burnett show before. However, her voice had the same kind of charisma, humor, and warmth. She might have made a big splash without ever setting foot on film. Her voice was the sole performer. When Burnett made her triumphant comeback to Broadway in the late 1990s, it was as if she had never left. On November 21, 1999, she made her stage debut in Putting It Together, a musical revue by Stephen Sondheim, which premiered at the Ethel Barrymore Theatre. It had 101 performances in all, including 22 previews. George Hearn, Ruthie Henshaw, and John Barrowman were among the theater greats who stood behind Burnett as the wife. It seemed as though she had never left the stage when she returned to Broadway after a 30-year hiatus. Live tapings of the program were also shot for broadcast and home distribution, capturing both scheduled and unscripted incidents, such as when her skirt slipped mid-performance, and she made fun of it. Burnett was lauded by critics even if they had varied feelings about the program as a whole. Carol Burnett made a triumphant return, this time on Apple TV+, demonstrating that her stage presence was unparalleled even in the face of Sondheim's complex music. She played the role of Norma Delacorte, a rich Palm Beach woman who falls into a coma and then abruptly awakens in the 2024 TV series Palm Royale, A lot was required of the job. Burnett had to imitate someone who was just recovering their speech by performing physical humor and coming up with a sort of garbled talk. She conjured it up in her head. No one's age is an easy target for that kind of improvisation, but Burnett was 91 years old. She became the oldest female nominee in Emmy history for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series because to her efforts. 11 nominations were extended to the show after its broadcast on March 20, 2024. A plethora of famous faces filled the cast, with Ricky Martin, Kristen Wiig, Allison Janney, and Laura Dern. Even so, Burnett was notable. Once again, fresh audiences learnt about a performer who had captivated audiences for more than 7 decades.